welcome to episode 159 of The Route. The Route is a glorified coffee chat and podcast form that takes you from A to B with a new guest every episode. I'm your host, Christopher Nascimento, and let's get started. Before we begin today's podcast, just a couple things to cover as always. If you haven't already, subscribe to the podcast, follow the podcast, like it. Anything else you can do, rate 5 stars, all that good stuff just allows the podcast to grow just a little bit easier. We're available on, I believe, 10 or so audio platforms: Apple, Google, Spotify, Amazon, and a few others as well. And for video viewers, we're available on YouTube underneath at the Route Cast, where you can find the full video episode there as well. So take the time to do those following, subscribing, and all that good stuff. Then once you're done that, check us out on all social media platforms. That's all the traditional ones, but the one a little bit more important for this podcast is LinkedIn. That's also underneath the Route Cast. If you're watching on YouTube, you can see it at the top hand of the corner here. And then with that, you can see each week when a guest comes on the podcast, we share, let's say, a little snippet in regards to what that podcast episode will be about, a link to the episode, and then also maybe the ability for you to connect with myself, the guest, other people that are engaging with the posts. And that way it allows you to maybe have somewhere to start your network, grow your network, maintain it, all that good stuff. So check us out there at the Route Cast. With that now said, we can get into today's guest. Today's guest is brought to you by Zoom. In the world of partnerships, there's a simple principle: you adapt or you die. In this fast-paced industry, you can't afford to miss a beat. And that's where Zoom will help you win each and every time. Zoom provides premier real-time data insights for partnerships across broadcast, streaming, and social like no one else. They're always ready, and detailed analytics help you get the upper hand and save time in your day-to-day reporting. So if you're ready to upgrade your reporting today, make the smart choice and choose Zoom. With that, today's guest. I'd now like to welcome someone who I've actually had the pleasure of meeting in university. They're a guest speaker for one of my courses, specifically digital marketing. And obviously since then and throughout their career, they've had a wealth of experience in the space. And I thought it'd be great to catch up on the route and kind of hear more about their story. So Director of Growth at Pelago and co-founder at the Humans of Martech Podcast, Phil Gamache. Welcome to the podcast. How's it going?
Thanks for having me, Chris. Yeah, doing good. Can't complain. Long weekend here in Canada. I work for a U.S. startup, so not everyone celebrates the holiday. But yeah, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm excited to get into it. And I guess as the name of the podcast says, the route, so maybe let's start there. Where did your maybe career or interest in marketing begin, maybe university? And how did we get to where we are today?
Yeah, I'll start with the TLDR, I guess, and then let you kind of pick it apart as we get through it. But yeah, I guess like the earliest signs of like interest in marketing probably take me back to high school. I had a really good teacher in high school who saw like my interest in math and data and spreadsheets, and also like I wanted to be kind of a graphic designer, so they had like suggested digital marketing is this like new interesting field. This is like 15 years ago now, so at the time it was still kind of pretty new. Like social media was just like popping up around there, so yeah, I haven't really looked back since then. It was my goal to just like do a bachelor's at University of Ottawa in digital marketing. And so I did the co-op program at U of O, and I got a bit of experience under my belt, worked in government, did a stint at the University of Ottawa also, and worked for an agency for like a year-ish. And I feel like I found my people, and I started freelancing a little bit, like between graduating university and getting my first job. We called it Captive Creative, and it was my first like entrepreneurial venture into just like how can I help like friends of friends and parents of friends that have companies or small businesses just get set up on their WordPress sites or get their socials set up and stuff like that. So I had a couple of like really small clients, but it's my first taste of getting my hands dirty and building a tiny little business. And we ran that for a couple of years, I think, but ended up like fizzling out when I got my first big job, I guess, like in tech. So Ottawa's kind of split between like downtown and Canada for like most of the tech jobs. And so I got my first gig at a company in Canada called Chipworks. They're a reverse engineering company, so like focused in the semiconductor space and the intellectual patent IP space. We did a lot of cool stuff, and I spent like 4.5 years there. They were the first company to just give me the keys to their MarTech stack. Like marketing automation wasn't really a thing back then. They were spending a ton of money on Salesforce and Pardot, and I was just like a kid hungry to learn new tools and figure out how to optimize stuff. So I spent 4.5 years there, learned a ton, moved over to a startup in downtown in Ottawa called Clipfolio. They're still kicking around and doing cool stuff. They're a dashboard tool for SMBs. They kind of cater to a bunch of different verticals, but they have really good inbound SEO traffic. So it's really fun to experiment and learn from some of the top marketers in the city. I think we're working at that company. I was hired by John Taylor, who ended up becoming close friend and co-host of our podcast now, Humans of Martech. And when I was working at Clipfolio, a bunch of stuff like typical startup things, ended up like starting by focusing on automation, ended up leading the team and having a short stint as director. Also spent a bit of time teaching at the University of Ottawa. So I think they were called Social back then, local marketing agency in Ottawa. They had a partnership with the University of Ottawa to teach recent postgrads or folks that were about to graduate this like 10-week intensive boot camp, if you will, in digital marketing. And the 10 weeks was taught by 10 different local Ottawa marketers, and like you'd cover SEO and content marketing and paid ads and all that fun stuff. And I got to teach the marketing automation and MarTech program. And it was a really cool experience to get to like instill this like cool MarTech industry for folks that like were graduating with very little understanding of practical digital marketing, right? Like you get the theory, the 4Ps. I've never used the 4Ps in my career. So it's a really cool opportunity to just like get folks interested and excited about like what is digital marketing today in practice and in an industry. I'm still in touch with some of my students from there. So I did that for 3.5 years part-time on top of like doing my full-time gig. But it was a ton of work because I had to create the content myself. Like they didn't give me slides and they were like, all right, teach this. They were like, hey, like we have no content for this. Can you like create content? So it was a good opportunity to like crystallize my thoughts and like do a bit more research on the industry. And throughout the process, I actually learned a ton myself. And it was a really fun experience. And when I was at Clipfolio and I took over some of the team management duties, around that time, I got a puppy at home who was super, super small, very needy. And I was living in the suburbs in Orleans, commuting downtown. It was pretty painful. Like, bad commutes would be like hour there, hour back. So it was tough on the home life a little bit. And since I was managing the team, I was like, hey, like, why don't we try out this like hybrid work style here a little bit? This is ahead of COVID when everyone went remote. And we gave it a shot. I fell in love with just like working from home part-time at least. But there was a lot of like butting heads with other senior managers at the company, kind of the old guard that had this mentality of butts in seats as indicators of productivity. So I got hungry to look at companies that were fully remote, like distributed, spread out across the globe, and got interested in US companies who were paying folks regardless of where they live. Like they were paying them US salaries. As you might know, if you're in Canada, getting paid in US dollars is like a 30% raise if you're making the same money, at least for now. Like if you're listening to this in a few years, who knows what the currency rate is going to be. But I started with like a list of like these cool remote companies. Had Buffer, Zapier, Doist, There's a lot of those, and Automatic was part of that list, and so was Close.com, a couple of smaller companies, and I just like kept an eye on the job postings and the careers pages. And one day there was a marketing automation lead posting that went up for Close.com. They're like a CRM that competes with Salesforce and HubSpot CRM for SMBs and startups. So I applied for it, went all in on that job application, ended up getting that job, and it was a super fun experience. Like my first time working for a bootstrap startup, so not a VC backed. So pretty cost efficient, but fully remote, like distributed across the globe. A bunch of folks in Europe, a couple of Canadians on the marketing team also, and we had like a retreat where we like would all meet up in person. But that was around the time that COVID hit, so I didn't get to do the in-person all company retreat, but we did meet up in Toronto. And it's funny, I think I was one of the first ones in Canada maybe to catch COVID in February. It's not funny. I should say that, but yeah, it's
crazy though.
Yeah, it was a wild experience, but yeah, I knew that like that was my future. Like I always told myself like maybe I'm gonna have to move to the States, like San Francisco, New York, if I want like a really cool job, work for a cool company. But Close was the first one to confirm that, I can not move. I can stick to where my family and my friends are and still work for some of the coolest companies in the world. So yeah, I stuck it out at Close for a bit of time, learned a ton, did some awesome work, like just super fast paced work. Like I think I did more in 1 year at Close than I did in a couple of years at Clubfolio. But around that time, like during the pandemic, I started the Humans of Martech podcast with my co-host. He hired me at Clubfolio, and we were just meeting kind of on a bi-weekly basis. And one day we were like, hey, why don't we just like hit record, baby? There's gonna be some folks that are gonna get some value out of like our banter or our musings. And initially the idea was like I had stopped teaching a couple of years into Close. The digital marketing certificate kind of sunsetted, so I was like, hey, like maybe we just like repurpose my slide content that I spent like 200 plus hours building. Why don't we repurpose that on a podcast version? So it kind of like grew from there. We've been doing that for 3.5 years now, crossed 100 episodes last year. This year we got some really awesome brand partnerships and sponsors on the show, so still doing it part-time, outsourcing some of it this year, so get a bit more time on the weekends, but really enjoy it, get to learn from a bunch of really smart folks, and selfishly, like I get folks on the show that are experts in things that I'm having problems with in my day job. So when I moved from Close, I applied to another fully remote async company, and this was a company called Automatic. They're the parent company of WordPress and WordPress.com and WooCommerce and a bunch of these other brands, and super different world working at Automatic. And maybe we can unpack some of that later, but I learned like what it is really to work asynchronously as opposed to having like Zoom long days of just like synchronous meetings. This company was very written, overly communicative, async type of communication, and I got to work for like one of the most popular products in tech, and the founder, Matt Mullenweg, he really instilled this async culture at the company. But yeah, so I still kept doing the podcast while I was over there, and some of the things that I was learning, I would like get folks on the show to double down on that learning. But the guy who hired me at WordPress, Justin Vanning, he ended up leaving WordPress and going to a startup called Pelago Health, and at the time they were called Quit Genius. We rebranded last year, but bit of a different mission. Instead of just being a tech company trying to get users to buy our product, I got to be part of a team who's conquering addiction, specifically tobacco, alcohol, and opioid use disorders. And I work on the B2C side of the business. So if you're in a company that has this Pelago Health as a benefit, my role is just like generating awareness of that benefit amongst eligible employees, getting them into the product, helping them use it and conquer their substance use disorder. So yeah, it's been way different from working in tech. This is my first taste of working in health tech, if you will. Also, it's kind of like a B2B2C model, so very different from what I've done. But yeah, that's pretty much where I am today, and still enjoy doing it. There's a ton of stuff that I continue to learn on the podcast as well as at work. And yeah, that's the TLDR version, I guess, of my route, but probably talked for like 10 minutes, so it wasn't that short.
No, that's perfect. I think that's what the whole podcast is about. Now, I've had guests go. I think I had one guest go an hour on their route, right? And then I asked maybe one question at the end, and that was the podcast. But no, I think that's perfect. That's exactly how it's supposed to be, and so much to kind of unpack there already. I typically like going to the beginning and then working our way to where we are now again. So I guess let's say if we just touch on all the different time periods, and we'll get to where we are now, going back to maybe when you're in high school, right? I think you're discussing when you first had that interest, or when it first came to light that there's an opportunity to do digital marketing. Was there any ever some additional thoughts about doing something else, or when you're applying for university, was it always going to be, the co-op program at UO Ottawa for marketing? I'm assuming, or were there other things that kind of came to mind as well?
Yeah, marketing was like this cool opportunity to meld or like mold these two areas that I was interested in. Like I was interested in economics and finance, and like I was just a fan of math, and it was always like one of my strongest courses. I'm a big like fantasy hockey nut, and have been for like 2 decades plus, and so I've been in like spreadsheets and analyzing like stats and data and projection models, and so it was something early on in high school that I was like, oh, like there's so many things that I could just apply to different domains and stuff like that I've picked up on. But I also loved graphic design. I grew up on a Mac before I could probably talk. Like both of my parents were in the production space. My dad's a video editor, videographer, and a photographer. And my mom's a web designer. So I learned about like the graphic world of design really early on, and enjoyed it a lot. Like in high school, I was like the guy doing like videos for like the social committee, and building websites on the side for friends. And so I was like, I want to be a graphic designer, or maybe even like web dev, but I didn't love code, like didn't love HTML and CSS. I was kind of like hesitant about the web dev route, but really liked like graphic design. I was like, like I don't know which one I want to pick: finance, economics, data, or web design. And yeah, I had this one teacher that was just like, hey, there's this new thing called digital marketing, and it's all about like kind of merging those two fields. Like there's a lot of data related to people going on websites, and there's like tracking codes and revenue metrics, and at like tiny startups you could probably do a lot of the graphic design, so you could probably wear both of those hats. And I hadn't really heard of marketing back then, but I remember going home and just like binging, like like a lot of folks who end up going in marketing like fall in love with the madman era of marketing. And so yeah, like advertising was one of my first loves, but as you get into marketing you quickly discover that advertising is a very tiny subset of actual marketing. And haven't really done a lot of advertising myself throughout my career. It's mostly been with like data, email, life cycle, that type of stuff. But yeah, U Ottawa was always a focus for the co-op program. I always thought like it was a no-brainer. Like I had so many friends that were just like, nah, I don't really want to do co-op, and I didn't get it. Like for me, it was a no-brainer. Like you can graduate with working experience. Clearly, that's going to help you get a job after your 4-year degree. So I was like, this is like a bit more expensive, takes a bit more time to like apply to jobs and blah, blah, blah. And it's more intensive, and you actually graduate like 4 months later than most folks do, because you have like different work terms that are split up in between your school terms. But for me, it was a no-brainer. Like, why wouldn't I graduate with some of this hands-on experience, but also get to like try different types of companies? Like, I did a stint at government, and I knew that I was never going to work in government again. And I
Yeah,
did
I
a
had that
stint,
too.
did a stint at the University of Ottawa, which is kind of interesting, but like still pretty close to, public sector. And then I had a stint at an agency that was just like 10 or 12 people, and they were working with uh, companies that were sustainable. Like around that time, it was really big on like green marketing. Like our product is eco-friendly and that type of stuff. So like they were helping companies with like these like greenwashing labels, and they had the eco logo certification. They're called TerraChoice is the name of the agency, and I loved it there, and it was so cool to work with a bunch of different clients. I got to like do some data stuff, do some Martech stuff, do some graphic. A lot of it was graphic design stuff, but I fell in love with the folks that were there, and just an awesome tight knit group of people, and ended up doing my second work term there. So I spent like over a year while still at school. And so I graduated with like some pretty solid experience. And it was definitely like one of the reasons why I got a job like a couple months after I graduated. So yeah, I don't know if you're listening and you're in school right now and you're debating about the co-op program, like I think it's a no brainer.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. I started off in accounting at U Ottawa, and I was like, oh, everyone needs an accountant. I'm just gonna like apply to my job on my own, and it did work when I was in accounting. I think I applied to a job on a Sunday. I had an interview with them on Monday, and then the following Monday I started work with them. Like that's how quick it went. But then when I switched to marketing, I was like, oh man, the co-op program would have been good here. But
Yeah.
then I finished and kind of figured some things out. But I can definitely see that. But yeah, I think you touched on some great points there where even just where you're just touching on Mad Men. I remember in university in marketing at the beginning, that's what everyone was talking about in class too, and everyone was in love with advertising, obviously because of that and the courses too. But it is a unique subset of it. And I guess then moving on through it, obviously, you had the different opportunities through a co-op to learn what you like versus what you didn't. Um, where did it kind of go from there? Where did the let's say the connections you made through those internships, co-op internships, was that something that allowed you to then get that job after school a little bit easier, or was it something where you still had to apply and you just leverage that experience?
Yeah, it was just a outbound application through
Yeah.
LinkedIn. Job posting was on LinkedIn. There's no connections at all in there, but it was like a entry level gig. I forget the name of the term. Like I think generalist was the term. Like I think it was like marketing generalist was the name of the job posting, and it was like a tech company, and they had like a bunch of things in the job description. I was like, hey, like this seems interesting. I'm gonna get to like get a taste of wearing all these different hats, and I'll see the stuff that I enjoy doing the most, and ended up just like applying for it. And maybe, other folks applying for it were also recent grads. Maybe some did co-op, maybe some didn't. But they were like definitely impressed with the fact that I had spent time while I was doing my degree also working, and picked up experience. So yeah, it wasn't really connections or anything like that. It was just like posting on LinkedIn. So LinkedIn helped me get my first job for sure.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. I know I was reading something actually last week. I don't know if it's just the time period we're at now, but it was saying 90% of all positions that are filled have a reference. If that makes sense. And obviously, if you go on LinkedIn, you see the amount of people applying to these or these positions are pretty crazy. But I guess maybe going into the future a bit too, but still kind of along your route. If you're to give maybe someone advice that's applying to jobs right now, do you have maybe anything just being in the position that you're in, or like, hey, maybe look at doing this, or this is a way to stand out? Just while we're on that topic.
Yeah, like if you don't have that co-op experience, or like you've done something on the side as you're graduating, or maybe you've graduated for a bit and you haven't been able to like pick up a job yet. I'm a big fan of side hustles, and I'm not a proponent of like the hustle culture and like, like always working and never chilling or relaxing, but there's so much value in just doing something like trying something out. When you're applying to a job, and especially in tech, and they're just like, hey, like I noticed you don't really have experience and you just recently graduated, but you're able to say like, well, you know, like I don't have experience, but I built this website for my friend and I started this little freelancing company. I'm managing 3 different social media presences on Twitter and LinkedIn now. I'm learning about this and learning about that. I took a free course on like copywriting, and this is some of the samples of my work that I've done for this friend. So it's just like there's so many ways you can learn and just like try stuff out, that, you know, this idea of side hustles, like whether it's a podcast or a website, or it doesn't have to be like this crazy thing, just like having this portfolio of stuff that you've done, whether you were paid to do it or it was all like pro bono or you did it for fun. Even stuff for fun, like maybe you're into fantasy hockey, or maybe you're into like horticulture, just like bird watching, like whatever your hobby is, like create a website about it, like write some content about it. Especially if you want to be in marketing, like there's endless opportunities for you to build a portfolio and have stuff to show. And I think that like having the stuff in the portfolio is one thing, but just showing the initiative and the curiosity just like says so much about a person, that like if I'm hiring entry level roles, like the number one thing I'm looking for is less experience and like less like skills in a specific area, and more about their curiosity. Like how hungry are they to learn different stuff? Like I love asking questions about, you know, like how do you learn about stuff? Like what websites or newsletters or like accounts on Twitter are you a big fan of that you like religiously read or follow? And that says a ton to me about how this person has thought about how they are going to learn and like who they learn from. Like there's so many creators out there today, and I think that I'm where I'm at today because I spent a ton of time early in my career learning from some of those folks and trying to do my part now and giving back on my own podcast. But yeah, like that would be my advice, like side hustles, and just like show folks your curiosity to learn, and just like double down on professional development. But even early in your career, that could be as simple as like, these are like my 15 people to follow on Twitter, and I've built this website for my friend based on this like free course that this guy did. Like there's just so many ways that you can build a portfolio and learn today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that's a great piece of advice to give. And I guess touching on that as well, I know you may have mentioned that co-op program definitely aided you in maybe getting that job experience and then maybe getting a job soon after graduating. But was there any overlap in regards to what you were just saying in starting that entrepreneurial journey with Captive, where you kind of had your own, business where you're doing some consulting, or is that something more so you just wanted to, scratch that creative or entrepreneurial itch?
Yeah, that was my side hustle. So
Okay.
I started that with a buddy at university before we graduated, and so we picked up like some super small like friends of friends and like parents of friends who had SMBs and small businesses, and we ran it for a couple of years. And I was still running it on the side when I got my first job at Chipworks, and I was still like picking up some stuff, moonlighting like during the evenings, graphic design. So yeah, it was my way of having a portfolio. So on top of the co-op experience, like this like, oh, this guy is like doing a bit of freelancing on the side. He's got graphic design chops. He can probably apply those here. So yeah.
Yeah, that makes sense. And I guess from there, getting to that first role that you had, right? I know you mentioned you applied on LinkedIn. That's how you kind of came about it. And then, what was that experience like? Kind of looking back at it for you, was it almost a whirlwind? Because I know when I graduated university, I was like, "Hey, I'm ready to go. I'm heading into the job field." And when you kind of got that first role, you're like, "Oh, wait a second. I don't think I know as much as I initially thought." Right? Where a lot of it you probably learn on the spot. What was that like for you? Let's say, right?
Yeah, some of it for sure was just like learning on the spot,
Yeah.
and um kind of just like faking it until you make it, you know. But
Yeah.
like the learning never stops. So like I was still really big. So like the company Chipworks, they ended up getting acquired by Tech Insights when I was there, but they spent a ton of money on some really cool marketing technology. And so Salesforce and Pardot were like the two bigger tools there. And the marketing team, wasn't really using those tools to their full potential. And so that was one of the first opportunities I saw at that company. It was just like, I got the keys to Pardot, and they were using it as this like newsletter tool that they were blasting a newsletter to subscribers once a month. And I was like, hey, there's a way to like hook up this Pardot tool, this marketing automation tool, to Salesforce, and find a way to like tell our sales team who of these potential semiconductor prospects on our website might be interested or have like intent to purchase. And I discovered this idea of like lead scoring from following different folks and reading different blog posts. And I learned how to like build the lead scoring model and send that data into our Salesforce. And I got really close with the folks on our sales team, and also like wore this like sales operations hat. And but I won't credit everything to just being like self-taught. There was a lot of self-teaching for sure, but I learned a ton from YouTube videos and webinars. But we also had a subcontractor. So it was a company called CRM Nerds. It was just one guy, Paul Wilson, and he came in and he was like our Salesforce development consultant, but he also had like Pardot experience. So when we were just like, hey Paul, how do we be able to like do this or that, and he would be like, actually, like that's not the right way to do it. Like here's how you should build it, and here's how you do it. And he would like just like teach me, and he like opened my eyes up to marketing automation and how you'd be able to like make a career in this field. And it's funny, I had recently just had him on my own podcast. We reconnected. He ended up having like a crazy career working for companies like Slack and Adobe and Marketo at like VP levels. So I was like super lucky and fortunate to have him as a mentor and someone who taught me a ton about this space itself. But yeah, I don't know. I probably still would have ended up like going down the automation route, maybe not as fast or as deep, but yeah, it was a different time. I feel like a lot of folks graduating today, I don't know if they still have that like corporate in office type of feeling. Like it was, like you had business casual, like driving to Canada every day or busing to Canada every day. And yeah, it's just a different world, but a super valuable experience, and ended up getting me my job at Clipfolio, which I feel like was really one of the biggest career accelerators for me. Tiny little startup company that had a ton of turnover, and I was able to get like a couple of promotions by just focusing on my work and getting to know different people in the company. So yeah, it was a huge role.
Yeah, and that kind of leads exactly where my head was going next, right? Just in regards to that experience you're getting in marketing automation, and then kind of leading that to Clipfolio. Was that almost like a natural progression, maybe something from connections, or like how did that come about? Because it seemed like it flowed into it perfectly, and maybe an opportunity came about because of it.
Yeah, that also wasn't like a connection. It was just a job posting that went up
Yeah.
around the time that I was at Chipworks. So I said they were acquired, and it was funny because like there's two big like semiconductor companies in Canada. There's one called Tech Insights, and we were Chipworks, and they ended up merging, if you will. Like Tech Insights bought Chipworks, so we were now like the enemy. Like we were fighting this enemy for so many years, and now we were just like acquired by them, and we were like merging marketing teams and figuring out how to merge tech stacks, and there was some cool experience there. But I lost like the excitement with like the bigger company, slower process, and they also went through a layoff shortly after that. So I started getting hungry for building a list of like what are the coolest companies in Ottawa. This may be like a theme that you could pull out from my experience. Like it's less the jobs that I've landed are less networking based and connection based, and more just me proactively knowing what are my like ideal companies to work for. And like I would literally have like a spreadsheet of it and just like columns next to the company name about like domain authority score, like estimated web traffic, the industry that they're in, the tech stack that they're using by looking at like some of the snippets of code on their site. And so I knew like on a daily basis when I was ready to make a move, like I had targets and prospects. And at the time, like I wasn't open to remote world. Like I didn't even know it existed probably. So it was limited to Ottawa. So it was way easier. And there weren't a ton of companies in tech that were like considered startups in Ottawa. I was really big on this idea of staying with a startup. Like I did the stint at government and with the University of Ottawa. And when I was at the agency, I worked with some like pretty big enterprise companies, and they're just so painfully slow. And I had this idea of playing with tech and moving fast and learning fast that I knew like startups was something that I had to stick to. And so Clifolio was like right at the top of the list of like up and coming startups in the downtown Ottawa. I wanted to stop commuting to the West End. At the time I was like renting downtown. So yeah, there's a job posting that just like popped up, marketing automation specialist, and different tech stack completely. So it's a little bit worried about it, but yeah, just applied to it. Had my interview with John Taylor, who is like I said, co-host and great friend, and I think I was more excited about the job opportunity because of the people that were there than like the product. But there's so many benefits, and yeah, I worked with like a ton of folks that I'm still very well connected to. Like made awesome friends, learned a ton about like the growth marketing industry and SEO from John Taylor. And so yeah, picked up like Marketo is the platform that they were using for automation. So I had to learn that from spending 4.5 years at Chipworks in Pardot. And yeah, it was just super fun. Definitely career accelerator. And like I said, there was a ton of like layoffs, and in startups, like there's a certain runway of cash in the bank, and you have this like monthly recurring revenue, and at some point you over invest in certain things. And Clifolio had bought like amazing new offices downtown in Ottawa, and it was a bit premature looking back, and the company ended up like doing some layoffs. And I survived like some of the rounds of layoffs, and naturally came promotions there, and ended up like just becoming digital marketing manager. So I managed the team. I think it was like 4 or 5 people back then, but it was like taking off my marketing automation hat and just like putting on like a team building hat. And I instilled like the hybrid working culture there, like I said, and ended up like just having a short stint at director. I think that was like a way for them to retain me and save me before I ended up like getting hungry and started applying for other jobs. But yeah, again, like I think that's the common thread for me, is that I think I would agree with what you said, where most job postings aren't posted and a lot of them come organically through recommendations and stuff like that. In my experience, like I still believe that to be true, but I personally like always kept an eye on really cool companies. And when there was a job posting that came up, I just went like all in on applying for that. And I didn't always get those jobs. Like there was way more like declines and shutdowns than there were like success stories. Tons of companies that I applied for that didn't end up getting the job, but learned a ton throughout the process, became comfortable with interviewing and like building a portfolio. And I always asked for feedback from managers when like they would turn me down. I ended up getting some really good feedback from folks. So yeah.
Yeah, and I guess going through that process, I know you touched on the hunger, and that's what maybe led to the next role. But one of the things that you said there was kind of interesting when you said, you'd go through those interviews and you would ask for feedback. Do you remember some of those things that they would share that you're like, hey, this is something that I'm going to apply going forward because it's really going to help me to then get those jobs that you later did?
Yeah, so I actually recently had on our podcast Amrita Matur. She recently got a VP marketing gig at ClickUp, super popular productivity or product management tool. Um, and she, at the time when I interviewed with her, she was working at a company called Consys, and they ended up rebranding to Superside, kind of like an agency. And she was building her team fully remote. So around the time that I was applying at Close, or like from Clipfolio going to Close, like I started applying to a bunch of these remote company jobs, and Consys was one of the ones that I applied for, and I did the interview process with her. And in the middle of the interview process, got like right until the end, and there was a take-home assignment, like a lot of interview processes do. And I think at the time I had like 3 or 4 other like prospects on the go, and so I didn't spend as much time as I should have on that take home assignment. So I ended up getting like the decline from them, and she had offered like, hey, like I'm happy to give you feedback if you're interested in it. And I was like, yeah, like would love that. Most companies just send this like templated answer, and you don't ever hear back from them. But I ended up like taking her up on that, and she gave me feedback that I think played a big role in helping me land future gigs. And part of the feedback was that in my take-home assignment, I didn't ask enough questions. Like they gave me this problem, and then I went off on my own, put my head down, made some assumptions, and then just like presented my take-home. And she was like, what you should have done was ask a bunch of questions up front. And by asking questions, you're showing where your head is at, how you're thinking strategically, and you're getting enough information before making these assumptions. And the other one was make the take home like about the company as much as possible. And I think I like repurposed or recycled like past take homes for it. And so when I applied to Close like a couple months later, I had a take home assignment with them also. And I also did this in the take home when I got my job at WordPress. And I just like I went all in on asking all of the questions before the take home, and it was probably super annoying, and just like making sure I showcased like where my head was at. I was covering all my bases, and made the take homes ultra specific about the company, like had their logo on my slide decks. And I like made assumptions about their personas and the targeted users. And so it was like, I think it played a big role in me like performing a lot better on some of those take homes. So yeah, if there's ever someone who is like turning you down in the interview process, but they're offering you feedback. Amrita said that it's usually like she didn't offer this to everyone. She offered it to people where she was like, oh, like she wanted to hire that person, but like there was a couple of things that like didn't super work out, and she wanted to give them that feedback. And she did that with a couple other folks also. So you know, an interview is offering you feedback. Take them up on it every time. It was super valuable for me.
Yeah, no, that's pretty interesting to hear and very applicable to others. So I appreciate you sharing that. But just like even just you saying that, I'm like, oh, I could see like even myself maybe doing that on some applications or different things like that. But
Yeah.
that's good to hear. And I think you were kind of then touching on how that then helped you get the close job, right? So I know you kind of touched on it briefly. You had that hunger, then you kind of touched on, maybe how it came about in regards to taking that feedback and applying it. What was that job then like? Because obviously it's a bit different than maybe some of the things you've done in the past, right? So do you mind maybe diving into that a bit further in regards to what maybe guided you or maybe aspired you to go in that direction?
Yeah, the job at Close was like lead of marketing technology, marketing operations. So it's like different buzzwords for marketing automation. So I had built like a pretty solid 7-ish years of experience being the person who was the in-house subject matter expert on automation. So it definitely like helped me build that credibility to apply at Close for that job. But I was also teaching at that time, right? So at the University of Ottawa, I was like 2 years into teaching that part time, and so I was applying for a job called like marketing operations and technology lead, and I was teaching the portion of the postgraduate certificate on marketing automation and technology. So there was some pretty solid credibility, I guess, but there was also a take home that I needed to do with that one. So yeah, not overly different. I think different type of company, bootstrap company. I've always worked for VC backed companies, so that was a different experience for sure. But fully remote company, that was like the bigger change there. But again, like that was just a job posting that I applied to. It wasn't a connection or anything like that. But I was a huge fan of the brand and the product, and followed like their CEO is Steli FT, who was like really big in like the cold outbound email space, and he was on some of the coolest podcasts that I was like listening to. So I was like, oh man, like it would be awesome to work at Close.
Yeah, no, that's pretty cool. And I guess just kind of, or was that one of the companies that you had on that Excel sheet that you were
Yeah,
referring
for
to?
sure.
Yeah. And then did you, for the most part, get an opportunity to interview or even just apply to a lot of those companies on those spreadsheets where you can maybe share some of that insight you're having? Because I think as you're kind of going through it, it sounded like you had quite a bit of, let's say, columns, right? Where you're like, hey, I'm tracking this, I'm tracking that, where I'm sure that would be something that would impress people in those interviews to an extent.
Yeah, it didn't. Yeah, I did share with the companies when interviewing with them that like like they're at the top of my list. I'm in like the research mode right now, or kind of like
Yeah.
hunting for something else. But yeah, Automatic was like part of that list too. There's a lot of other companies that I applied to, like Stripe and like Zapier, that I've probably sent like 10 plus applications to those companies, and
Yeah.
haven't gotten an interview there. But yeah, I was lucky enough to get an interview, land the gig at Close, and it helped me get the job at Automatic. And I worked for WordPress.com for a couple of years. So yeah, it was a fun experience for sure.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. And I guess through all that as well, if I'm not wrong, when you were finishing teaching at U Ottawa or closing that out a bit, you started up the podcast, correct? I kind of wanted to get into that, just obviously this being a podcast as well. When did that initially just kind of pop into your mind? I know you were saying you were having some conversations with your colleague and you're like, hey, like let's maybe just record this. But was it like a gradual process where it kind of came about, or was it, hey, let's just give this a go and kind of go from there?
Yeah, it was more of a gradual process, I think. There was like a thesis to the show, and we joked that like there's these like lost episodes that we never published, that we recorded, that we wanted to go live with, that we're like, no, we can do a bit better than this. But yeah, it was always like John came up with the title Humans of Martech. I wanted to call it Demystifying Marketing Automation, and I'm happy we went with his instead of mine, because like Martech is a lot more broad of a term than marketing automation, and we cover everything from like Gen AI to SEO to analytics to customer data stuff now. So it's pretty wide ranging. But it's been super fun. Like we've gotten the opportunity to chat with some of the top people in marketing technology, like Scott Brinker and Sarah McNamara at Salesforce, and a bunch of like CEOs and founders at companies in the CDP space, like mParticle and Census, and just made some really good connections throughout the process, and did it for fun mostly, right? Like it was never like maybe part of us like thought, like one day hopefully we'll get a ton of listeners and we can like sell the show, or we can actually like start making money out of this. But I always saw it as an opportunity to learn and network and sit down for an hour for free with people that probably charge like 500 plus an hour to consult for an hour of their time. And yeah, it's like crystallized a lot of my thoughts. They've helped me unclog certain problems in my day-to-day job. And somewhere along the way, like last summer, things really picked up, like around the hype with like ChatGPT. We dived into like marketing applications for it, did like a 4-part deep dive research on it, and then went all in on like customer data platforms and the new theme of the modern data stack, and having this composable approach to your data and your MarTech stack. And blow up a little bit with like some of the guests that are asking to be on the show. And then we started thinking, like we're spending a lot of time like doing this on this side. I wonder if we can get a bit of sponsorship money to like outsource some of this stuff. So yeah, ended up so this year we're sponsored by Census, who we interviewed on the show, and I'm also a customer myself. And we're also sponsored by NAC, who is a pretty big company in Ottawa. They're based in Canada. Actually, they do email templates, and just an awesome group of people. A lot of former Clubfolio folks that work there too. So maybe the networking helped me get sponsorships for the show, less so than jobs in my career. But we're also sponsored by Iterable, which is one of the coolest up and coming marketing automation platforms. I'm a customer myself, but we had their CMO on the show a couple of years ago. So yeah, it's just been a super fun ride. Like now we're starting to get like called out in some of these like posts for LinkedIn. I'm starting to get inbound from people like calling me an influencer. I'm like, bro, I'm not an influencer. I hate that term. Don't call me that. Like, I just honestly just like sharing content that I'm meditating on, that I'm thinking about, that I like crystallized and think that people like 2-3 years earlier in their career might see value out of it. And yeah, we're just like having fun with it. Even though we're sponsored, we're just having a ton of fun, learning and interviewing folks. And yeah, it's been a fun ride.
Yeah, no, that's amazing to hear. And to be honest, one of the things that you touched on that kind of uh, rang with me was just in regards to when I chat with people too. They were like, "Hey, how did you get that person on the podcast?" I'm like, "Oh, I just asked." And I'm assuming maybe there's some of that similarities with you too, where you'd be surprised that people willing to kind of give you that time, even though, like you're saying, some of them maybe would charge $500 an hour, but then they're like, "Oh, it's a podcast, yeah, like I'd love to share," and then you build a connection. It's really great from there. So that's kind of cool to hear how it came about for you guys. And I guess getting more to where we are now, I know we maybe skipped over some things, but you might maybe sharing about your current role a bit further, and then maybe how that came about and what you kind of do within it as well.
Yeah, so I ended up moving from clothes to WordPress.com. So I spent like a year and a half there, helping different teams on different roles. But it was my biggest company I've ever been at. So WordPress.com is actually like maybe 300-ish people, but we're part of the automatic like portfolio of brands. So that was like 7,000 plus people. But it was my first taste of working with like a data team and a data science team. So a lot of the stuff that like startup companies dream of doing, like we had a lot of that tooling built in house, and it was an amazing experience. I think a lot of startups dream one day of just like getting a certain amount of like web traffic in a month. Like at WordPress, we were doing that in like half a day. So it was a fun playground for growth experimentation. Like I jumped from focusing on lifecycle and trying to get people who started a free site converted to a paid plan. And then I moved over to growth product marketing. So I helped launch one of the new WordPress versions, which was like the first time we were launching a big, massive change to the WordPress ecosystem. So yeah, it was a fun ride. And like I said, the guy who hired me at that company, Justin Vanning, he ended up moving over to a startup, Pelago. And so when he left, he was like, we kept in touch. He's still a close friend today. And he like poached me to move over. So I guess like that, maybe that's the only time where like I got a job in my career from a connection, and I still interviewed, still did like the take home assignment, but yeah, that was through a connection, and it's been a wild ride so far. Very different from anything I've ever done, but I think like every job is different, and I think that was important in accelerating my learning, anyways. But this is very different in the sense that it's a B2B2C business model. So we have part of the business that's focused on selling to big companies and HR teams to get us added as a benefit on their like long list of benefits, and then once a deal is signed, it's actually passed over to our team, and our job is actually like generating awareness within the employee population, getting people to download our app, like read our content, how to how does like alcohol actually affect your sleep, and how does like your physical activity depend on your mood. And so there's a lot of like cognitive based behavioral therapy through the content, and it's super powerful. Like we have positive ROI for these HR teams because people are able to kick their addictions, so they're more productive and they cost less from a claims benefit to people and their companies. But the success stories of people that go through our program and are matched with our content and get to like work with a counselor and a coach, there's nothing better out there than like any of the therapy, the in-house, out-house type stuff. So yeah, super fun experience so far. Definitely more rewarding to say that like, yeah, it's still like revenue at the end of the day. Like our metrics are revenue and getting people through the funnel and what you would see in a typical company. But the output, instead of just revenue, is that we save that company a lot of money, but we save actual lives. Like there's a lot of people that say like, oh, I want to work for a mission driven company, and oh, we're making the world a better place. Like Pelago actually does that. Like no bullshit. We have success stories of people that have quit their addiction and they were on the ledge, and they have had a profound change in their life habits because of the experience that they did with our product. So it's pretty crazy to think that like we're helping to build a product that is actually saving lives and conquering like one of the most important problems out there. So yeah, that's a bit about the current role.
Yeah, and to be honest, just as you're mentioning there, like a lot of times, maybe someone will say, or a company will say, "Hey, we want to do good things," but then when you actually do good things, it's quite different, right? So that's kind of pretty unique, just in regards to how you put it like that, just in regards to where people may be at prior to using it. So, oh, very cool. And yeah, before we kind of wrap up the podcast, I always like to end it with two questions. Um, so this is episode 158, if I'm not mistaken, 159. Sorry, I should know better. But I've done this for however many now, and almost all these episodes I've said I'm going to live until I'm 103. I'm going to be on a rocking chair, thinking about all the different things I've done throughout my career. So I want to put the guest, in this case Phil, in the same position, right? So 103-year-old Phil on the rocking chair, thinking about all the things you've done in your career to date so far. What's maybe one story that stands out to you that when you're 103 on that rocking chair, you'll still be able to remember it and be like, wow, what a crazy moment that I got to do that for work at one point.
Yeah, I don't know if I have a good answer, but it's funny you say like on the rocking chair at 103. And my hope is that when I'm 103, I don't care about where my physical body is because I'm able to
Yeah.
upload my consciousness somewhere, and I
Yeah.
can still like prolong my living there, more Black Mirror type of stuff. But man, yeah, I don't know. I feel like there's a ton of stuff that maybe comes to mind. We ask on our show at the end of every episode, like Hugh, this idea of like balance and career and work life. I don't know if you can hear my daughter just woke up in the background there, but she's like changed a lot of like how I think about life. And I think that like it's so easy to get like stuck with like a certain problem that you're working through, and then like you spend time with like this little person that you helped create, and it's just like discovering the world and is amazed at like the tiniest little things. So I think that yeah, like in my rocking chair looking back, I think, you know, like regardless of what I've done in my career, the stuff that we've chatted about today, like none of it matters as much as the impact of like creating another human and watching her like learn and discover new things. I don't know, just like riffing here. I don't know if that's a good answer.
No, that's perfect answer. That it's unique to you, right? It's about you. So I guess with that too, I like to go into the future as we just did. But now if we go all the way, let's say through our time machine into the past, 16, 18-year-old Phil, maybe you're about to walk on campus for the first time you want, or maybe you're in the process of applying to university, right? If you go back in time and speak to that younger version of yourself, is there maybe one piece of advice that you've learned throughout your career so far that you'd be like, hey, little Phil, this is something that I've now learned that you should hear out because it's been pretty advantageous to now know that.
Yeah, there's probably a long list of stocks to invest in that I would tell
Not a bad
my
idea.
16-year-old self to double down in. But yeah, no, like I think that like I stumbled upon a pretty cool niche area of digital marketing, and it's worked out well for me. So I think that like maybe some of the advice I'd have for myself would just be like steering me like even closer in that direction, and maybe skipping certain steps along the way. Like I don't know. It's such a different world today than when I was 16. Like the opportunities to work remote and work for a U.S. company, and build a career from your home office, and get to travel the world because you had these like in person remote meetings. Um, that's maybe something that I would tell myself to look for earlier than like sticking around in Canada for as long as I did. But yeah, like I think honestly, some of the advice would just be to um, keep finding like what your true north is, and knowing that that's going to change as your personal life changes and your career changes. But I always really appreciated this idea of like sitting down and reflecting on like where I'm at right now, my current role. Am I enjoying what I'm doing? Is it going to help me land what I want to get to next? What is that thing I want to get to next? And if what I'm doing right now isn't going to help me get to that, how can I make certain changes in my current role that will allow me to do that? And if I can't, then like let's go to that list of like ideal companies to work for, and let's start looking at career job postings and applying for those.
Yeah. No, and to be honest, I think that's why I like ending the podcast with that question, because I think it summarizes everything and brings it all together perfectly. And unless there's anything else you'd like to share, I just want to thank you for coming on the podcast and sharing your route.
Yeah. Thanks for having me. This is a fun chat. Good reflection there. I feel like we meditated for an hour. Um, yeah. Thanks for having me,
Yeah.
man. Congrats on what
No,
you've built. Yeah, it's
yeah.
no shortage of work and effort, I know, and putting this stuff together, and you've done way more episodes than us. So yeah,
Yeah.
kudos to you, man.
Yeah. Thank you. Well, with that said, that's episode 159. Stay tuned for next week's episode. Thank you.